Years before he took on the name Saul Goodman and became Walter White's criminal lawyer in Breaking Bad, Jimmy McGill was a struggling public defender in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Jimmy had grown up a hustler and a con artist, but recently had resolved to turn his life around. His older brother Chuck was a highly successful lawyer working with law partner Howard Hamlin at the firm Hamlin, and McGill, or HHM. Chuck has spent most of his life getting Jimmy out of trouble and eventually forces his brother to stop the cons and find a real job. Inspired by Chuck, Jimmy gets an online law degree and passes the bar exam. While studying for the bar exam and working in HHM's mailroom, Jimmy met and befriended Kim Wexler, who, upon passing the bar, is hired by Chuck and Howard's company. Jimmy is passed over for a job and begins working in the low-paying and under-respected job of public defense. As Jimmy tries to get his burgeoning law career off the ground, he also becomes a caretaker for his brother. Chuck becomes convinced that he has an electromagnetic hypersensitivity, leading him to become a recluse with no electronics or sunlight in his home. Both Jimmy and medical professionals suspect that Chuck's condition is entirely psychosomatic. Despite his new career in law, Jimmy hasn't fully left behind his old ways and oftentimes tries to use his old hustler tactics to get ahead. While trying to win over new clients, the embezzling husband and wife duo the Kettlemans, Jimmy hires some accomplices to stage a car accident. Unfortunately, his accomplices target the wrong vehicle, putting them and Jimmy on the radar of drug kingpin Tuco Salamanca. Tuco and his men threaten to kill Jimmy, but Tuco's associate Nacho Varga convinces him it would be in their best interest to spare the lawyer's life. After seeing Jimmy's natural rapport with his older clients, Kim suggests he start specializing in elder law. While working with his new clients, residents of the Sandpiper Crossing nursing home, Jimmy discovers that Sandpiper was severely overcharging residents, to the point of elder abuse. Jimmy and Chuck work together to compile evidence for a class action lawsuit, and eventually Chuck suggests the case was too big for just the two of them, and that HHM should be brought in to help. During a meeting with HHM, Howard Hamlin agrees to take the case, but on the condition that Jimmy not be further involved in exchange for a percentage of the eventual settlement. Jimmy refuses the deal, but then discovers that Chuck had not only told Howard to bar Jimmy's participation in the lawsuit, but had also been the one to refuse to hire Jimmy at HHM in the first place. Despite Jimmy's best efforts to grow and make his brother proud, Chuck never saw him as anything but the con man he used to be. Devastated by his brother's betrayal, Jimmy allows HHM to take the case and stops taking care of Chuck and his condition. While Jimmy relapses into his old hustler lifestyle, Kim informs him that HHM was bringing in another law firm, Davis and Main, to assist with the Sandpiper case. Davis and Main were impressed by Jimmy's rapport with the elderly clients and wanted to hire him full-time. This leaves Jimmy to consider what he wants for his future. Elsewhere in season 1, Jimmy befriends parking lot attendant Mike Ehrmantraut. Mike was a former dirty cop still grieving the loss of his son Matt, who was murdered by fellow police officers when they feared that Matt would snitch about their corruption. Mike murdered those cops in revenge and was now taking odd jobs on the side to provide for his daughter-in-law Stacey and granddaughter Kaylee. One such job sees Mike working as hired muscle for a pharmacist named Price, who sells pills to Nacho Varga. I want to cut in real quick and tell you about this video's sponsor, Scentbird. Scentbird is a service that sends you a new high-end fragrance every month for just $17. We're talking designer brands like Prada, Gucci, and Versace, and even the more niche brands like Skylar, Heretic, and Confessions of a Rebel. Every month you get to pick a fragrance which you'd like to try, and they send you a 30-day supply. No more dropping upwards of $500 on some big designer fragrance that you're gonna stop using after a week because it doesn't quite match your style. I'm not gonna lie to you, I've never been much of a cologne guy. Going to the store and smelling all the samples just to figure out which one best suits me has always been pretty intimidating and inconvenient. But Scentbird makes it so easy. They have a scent profile quiz on their website that helped me discover which fragrances I'd be most interested in, and at $17 a month, it's a quick and affordable way to start building out my fragrance collection. Each fragrance comes in a nicely designed bag and canister. Just twist it open, pull it out, and the name of your fragrance is right there on the label. And you'll get a nice little card that tells you the name, the ingredients, and a little bit of the inspiration that went into making that fragrance and where you can go to buy a full-size bottle. This month I tried David's Perfume No. 2, Room 1015's Electric Wood, and Parfum de Marly's Pegasus. David Perfume No. 2's blend of grapefruit and sandalwood makes it the perfect combination of simple, calm, and fun. It's great for date night, and my wife is already trying to steal it from me. Electric Wood was inspired by the smell of opening a guitar case, and I do kind of feel like a rock star when wearing it. And something about Parfum de Marly's creamy and smoky notes makes it smell timeless and like I should be wearing a full tuxedo while wearing it. So head on over to scentbird.com and use my promo code RECAPCHILL to get 55% off your first month's order. That's just a little over $7 for a month of designer fragrances. You can find links to all of these fragrances in the description below to try them for yourselves. Thanks again to Scentbird. Now let's get back to the recap. In season 2 of Better Call Saul, Jimmy and Kim grow closer together, and he even shows her how to run a basic con to have a stock trader buy them expensive drinks. Kim enjoys the thrill of the con and winds up spending the night with Jimmy, while also convincing him to accept the offer of working for Davis and Maine. When the police start investigating Price and Mike asks for Jimmy's assistance in exonerating him, Jimmy uses some unconventional means to clear Price's name. This upsets Kim as Jimmy's unethical actions could cost him his new job at Davis and Maine, and since she recommended him for the job, his actions could reflect negatively on her. When Jimmy decides to run a commercial to draw in new Sandpiper clients without first getting permission, his bosses at Davis and Maine reprimand him, while Howard and Chuck punish Kim by demoting her. To win back her boss's favor, Kim manages to secure a large new client, Mesa Verde Bank, but despite this success, Kim still isn't treated with the respect she deserves. Jimmy becomes frustrated with the straight and narrow life of Davis and Maine and orchestrates his own firing so that he can start his own law firm with Kim. Kim agrees to quit HHM, but instead of forming a law firm together, Jimmy and Kim start their own separate firms in the same building. When Kim tries to secure Mesa Verde as her own clients, Chuck belittles her skills to Mesa Verde CEO Kevin Wachtel, leading him to remain at HHM. Furious for Kim, Jimmy decides to take Mesa Verde documents from Chuck's home to a copy store, secretly altering them. These forged documents cause a delay in Mesa Verde's application for a new branch, leading Kevin to fire HHM and hire Kim instead. Chuck, not believing he made the paperwork mistake, begins to suspect Jimmy was responsible and begins trying to find proof. Jimmy, realizing the worker at the copy shop was the only witness for his crime, goes to pay off the worker. As Jimmy watches from across the street, Chuck braves the outside light to interrogate the worker. Unfortunately, the electromagnetism is too much for Chuck to bear, causing him to faint and hit his head. Jimmy rushes to his brother's side and calls an ambulance. Upon Chuck's recovery, he confesses to Jimmy that his mistake on the Mesa Verde paperwork made him question his skills as a lawyer and that he now wished to retire. Racked with guilt, Jimmy confesses to tampering with the paperwork to frame Chuck. After Jimmy leaves, it's revealed that Chuck had secretly been recording their conversation to secure Jimmy's confession. As for Mike, Nacho pays for his help in killing Tuco, explaining that the drug dealer was erratic and posed a danger to Nacho if his side hustle selling Price's pills was discovered. Mike refuses to kill Tuco, but does agree to come up with a plan that would see Tuco imprisoned. Mike goads Tuco into assaulting him, leading to Tuco's arrest. When the police find Tuco's gun at the scene, the drug kingpin's Uncle Hector threatens Stacey and Kaylee's lives to force Mike into telling the police the gun belonged to him. Mike reluctantly agrees, telling the police the gun belonged to him, which ensured Tuco a lighter sentence. In retaliation for the threats made against his family, Mike begins targeting Hector Salamanca's drug shipments, stealing $250,000 from one of Hector's trucks and leaving the driver tied up. Mike hoped this would draw the attention of the authorities toward Hector's drug operation, but Nacho informs him that Hector had the scene cleaned up and planned to execute the driver. This leads Mike to try to take matters into his own hands, buying a sniper rifle to assassinate Hector with. But before he can take the shot, an unseen stranger leaves Mike a simple one-word message: don't. In season 3, Chuck is reacclimating himself to the outside world and planning his return to work, all the while scheming on how to use Jimmy's recorded confession to take him down. Howard suggests that the confession has no legal value, but Chuck has his own secret plan, orchestrating for Kim to discover the tape's existence. Kim takes on Jimmy as a client to give them attorney-client privilege, then informs Jimmy that Chuck had set him up. Despite her pleas for Jimmy to stay calm as the taped confession couldn't legally be used against him, an angry Jimmy breaks into Chuck's home and destroys the tape. But this was all a part of Chuck's plan, as Howard and a private investigator reveal themselves, having witnessed Jimmy breaking into Chuck's home to destroy evidence. And so, Jimmy is arrested. Chuck convinces the prosecutor not to pursue criminal charges against Jimmy, but instead force him to submit a confession of his crimes to the New Mexico Bar Association, which would potentially lead to Jimmy's disbarment. And so, Kim and Jimmy prepare for a legal battle against Chuck. Kim and Jimmy's legal strategy is primarily focused on discrediting Chuck by exposing his psychosomatic electromagnetic sensitivity. While Chuck is taking the stand to give his testimony, all of the lights are turned off and all electronics are removed from the room. Jimmy invites Chuck's ex-wife Rebecca to the courtroom, which throws off Chuck. While Chuck is on the stand for cross-examination, Jimmy reveals that he had hired a pickpocket named Huel to plant a cell phone battery in Chuck's pocket, meaning he had been exposed to electromagnetic energy for over an hour without noticing. When the court rules that Chuck's mental health should not be called into question, Chuck snaps at the idea that his condition wasn't real and angrily vents at Jimmy, which shocks the room. Ultimately, the New Mexico Bar Association decides to suspend Jimmy for a year, which he and Kim take as a victory. Jimmy had already paid for several TV ad spots to market his law practice, so Jimmy takes on the alias Saul Goodman and begins selling his airtime to other local businesses. Meanwhile, Kim struggles to pay for her shared office with Jimmy now that he's out of work, so she takes on another client, overextending herself and eventually falling asleep while driving, resulting in a crash that breaks her arm. In a petty attempt to get revenge on Chuck, Jimmy decides to pay a visit to HHM's insurance company to detail the nature of Chuck's mental health struggles. Jimmy then gets word that the Sandpiper case is finally ready to settle, which would net him over $1 million for his share. Unfortunately, HHM and Davis and Main turn down the offer, believing they can receive more money if they continue to fight. The only way for Jimmy to receive his money now and keep his dream practice with Kim afloat is to convince Sandpiper resident Irene to accept the settlement against HHM's counsel. And so Jimmy goes about manipulating Irene into taking the settlement, which ostracizes her from her friends. Feeling guilty, Jimmy reveals his manipulations to Irene and her friends, which results in Irene retracting her acceptance and costing Jimmy his $1 million. Jimmy also decides to break his office lease, allowing Kim to work from home and take on a lighter workload. Meanwhile, Chuck's outburst on the stand has caused him to reevaluate his condition and resolve to conquer it. He begins reacclimating himself to sunlight and electronic devices and eventually is ready to return to work at HHM full-time. Unfortunately, Jimmy's visit to HHM's insurance company to inform them of Chuck's condition causes them to substantially raise their malpractice premiums, unless Chuck agrees to be supervised by another attorney. Chuck refuses this proposal, so Howard is forced to push Chuck into retirement, paying him an $8 million payout. Also in season 3, Mike learns who was responsible for intervening in his plan to assassinate Hector Salamanca, a rival drug dealer named Gus Fring. Both Gus and Hector work for the drug cartel leader Don Eladio, distributing his cocaine from Mexico into America. Recently, Eladio has shown more favor toward Gus, spurning a lot of jealousy from Hector and the Salamanca family. Gus is impressed by Mike's skill and ingenuity and agrees to hire him at the company Magical Electromotive to help launder the money stolen from Hector. Meanwhile, Nacho is becoming even more disillusioned with Hector's leadership. When Hector forces Nacho's innocent working-class father Manuel to use his business as a drug front, it's the final straw for Nacho. Nacho replaces Hector's heart medicine with empty capsules, hoping it would lead to a heart attack and death. During a meeting between Gus, Hector, and their associate Juan Bolsa, Hector is informed that Don Eladio wants the Salamancas to use Gus's trucks to smuggle drugs into America. This enrages Hector, who then suffers a stroke. To avoid any suspicion, Nacho then replaces Hector's fake capsules with his real medicine, which Gus takes notice of. As the season comes to a close, Chuck has been defeated and humiliated, costing him the career he loved so much. He relapses in his electromagnetic hypersensitivity and begins destroying his own home, then intentionally sets his house on fire while he's trapped inside. In season 4 of Better Call Saul, the death of Chuck seems to be hitting everyone hard except for Jimmy. Howard, unaware of Jimmy's insurance manipulation, blames himself for Chuck's suicide, having pushed him out of HHM. Jimmy happily lets Howard take the blame and continues to go about his life business as usual, which greatly concerns Kim. In his year of suspension from practicing law, Jimmy uses his alias Saul Goodman to sell burner phones to criminals. Kim takes a job working at Schweikert & Coakley, allowing her to handle the Mesa Verde account, which bored her, and pro bono defense counsel work, which excited and inspired her. Meanwhile, Mike is pulled further into business with Gus, and is placed in charge of overseeing the top secret construction of an underground meth super lab. Gus hires German engineer Werner Ziegler and his team to construct the lab, but if the Salamancas or Don Eladio discovered his business plans, it would be a disaster. Speaking of the Salamancas, Gus hires the best medical team to keep Hector alive. As Hector's mind recovers, Gus sends away the medical team, trapping the elder Salamanca in his own body as torture. Gus also informs Nacho that he was aware of his involvement in Hector's stroke, threatening to expose him to the Salamancas if Nacho didn't agree to secretly work for Gus. The Salamancas then send Lalo Salamanca to run the business in Hector's absence. He takes on a much more hands-on approach to the business, causing a great deal of stress for Nacho. Lalo gives his uncle Hector a bell to help him communicate and begins looking into Gus's operations to restore the Salamancas to top favor. When Werner begins missing his wife during the long months of construction, he makes plans to run away to be with her, inadvertently exposing details of the underground construction to Lalo. As Lalo tries to track Werner down, he kills Fred, an innocent employee of a money transferring service, for failing to give up more info on Werner. This infuriates Gus, and a reluctant Mike is forced to kill Werner. Meanwhile, as Jimmy's year of suspension comes to a close, his request for reinstatement to practice law is denied due to the chairman finding him insincere. Kim suggests Jimmy be more open about his emotions toward Chuck's death. So on his appeal, Jimmy gives a rousing speech about his desire to make his brother proud and honor the McGill name. His appeal succeeds, and even Kim is convinced that Jimmy had finally processed Chuck's death. But Jimmy then admits it was all a con to be reinstated, and he would now be practicing law under his alias, Saul Goodman. In season 5 of Better Call Saul, Jimmy is continuing to practice law under his alias, Saul Goodman. Meanwhile, Kim is beginning to feel disillusioned by her work with Mesa Verde, and when the bank wants her to forcefully evict a man named Acker from his home so they can build a new branch there, she enlists the help of Jimmy to stop Mesa Verde. Jimmy represents Acker against Mesa Verde and uses every backhanded scheme and con he can to sabotage Kim and Mesa Verde's case. Eventually, Jimmy and Kim discover that Mesa Verde's logo was stolen from a photographer and force the bank to drop their pursuit of Acker's property. Kim angers both Mesa Verde and her employers at Schweikert & Coakley and ultimately decides to quit to focus on her pro bono work. Kim and Jimmy then get married, allowing their conversations to be legally protected under spousal privilege. Meanwhile, Salamanca drug dealer Domingo, aka Crazy 8, is arrested. Nacho convinces Lalo to hire Jimmy as a lawyer to represent Domingo. Jimmy arranges for Domingo's release in exchange for becoming an informant for DEA agent Hank Schrader. Lalo uses this to his advantage, having Domingo expose the locations of Gus's dead drops. In retaliation, Mike, on Gus's orders, alerts the authorities to Lalo's involvement in Fred's death. Upon his arrest for murder, Lalo once again calls upon Jimmy for his legal assistance. Jimmy arranges for Lalo to be released on a $7 million bail. The only problem is Jimmy would have to pick up the money and deliver it himself. In exchange, Lalo offered to pay him $100,000. And so, against Kim's concerns, Jimmy heads out into the desert to pick up 2 bags filled with money. On his way back, Jimmy is confronted by armed gunmen who attempt to steal the money from him. Jimmy and the money are rescued by Mike, but when all of the vehicles are destroyed, Jimmy and Mike are forced to make their trek home on foot. Upon finally reaching civilization, Jimmy and Mike part ways. Jimmy posts Lalo's bail and returns home to Kim, seriously traumatized by the ordeal. Jimmy tells both Lalo and Kim that his car broke down, forcing him to walk home alone. This acts as a cover for his friendship with Mike and therefore his association with Gus. Kim discovers the truth when finding a bullet hole in Jimmy's coffee mug, and Lalo investigates Jimmy's car to similarly discover bullet holes. When Lalo arrives to confront Jimmy over his lies, Mike rushes to the scene with a sniper to protect his friend. But Mike wasn't needed, as Kim fearlessly stands up to Lalo, insisting that random passerbys could have shot up Jimmy's car after he abandoned it, then berates Lalo for not trusting Jimmy despite getting him out of jail for murder. Lalo accepts this explanation and leaves. Lalo retreats to his home in Mexico, bringing Nacho with him. Lalo introduces Nacho to Don Eladio, who approves of his business plans. While in Mexico, Gus calls on Nacho to assist in his plans to assassinate Lalo. Gus would send in a team of killers. Nacho just had to let them in. And so Nacho opens Lalo's gates to allow the assassins into the compound, then flees the scene. Lalo is able to fend off his attackers, killing all but one, then forces the survivor to inform Gus that Lalo had successfully been killed. As the season comes to a close, Kim suggests that she and Jimmy try to sabotage Howard's career in order to force the Sandpiper settlement. This would provide a very generous payout to them both, allowing them to focus on the legal defense work they felt called to. Jimmy is hesitant to the idea and begins to fear that his scheming conman ways had finally begun to corrupt the morals of Kim Wexler. Season 6 of Better Call Saul opens with Nacho on the run, following his assistance in helping Gus's men raid the Salamanca compound. The Salamanca family is hunting him for revenge over the supposed death of Lalo, and Gus wants Nacho dead before the Salamancas catch him so that he can't reveal Gus's involvement in the assault. Ultimately, the kind-hearted Mike convinces Gus to make a deal with Nacho. Nacho would turn himself over to Gus in exchange for Fring's men ensuring his father's safety. In addition, when Gus turns Nacho over to the Salamancas, they would allow him to fake an escape attempt, which would result in a mercy killing instead of a prolonged torture at the Salamanca family's hands. And so, as Gus turns Nacho over to the Salamancas, Nacho escapes. But instead of running, he steals a gun and shoots himself, allowing Nacho to go out on his own terms. But of course, Lalo isn't actually dead and has faked his own death. Lalo informs his uncle Hector of his survival and his plan to search for intel that they could use against Gus and prove his involvement in the assassination attempt. Lalo's only lead is Werner Ziegler, so he heads to Germany to uncover why this German engineer was involved with Gus Fring. Eventually, Lalo tracks down Casper, a member of Werner's crew during the construction of Gus's secret meth super lab. Casper reveals everything to Lalo, who returns to America with everything he needed to take down his family's bitter rival. Meanwhile, Gus has deduced that Lalo survived the attack and works with Mike to prepare for the eventual retaliation. Elsewhere, Jimmy is facing his own repercussions for his involvement with Lalo. He has become a pariah amongst his colleagues in the courthouse for his assistance in freeing Lalo from prison, and threats of an investigation against him are raised. But Jimmy's work with such a high-profile member of the cartel also leads to a massive boost in his clientele, allowing Jimmy to rent his own office space and hire a full-time secretary, Francesca. In the midst of his career resurgence, Jimmy and Kim have concocted an elaborate plan to ruin Howard Hamlin's reputation, ensuring a swift end to the Sandpiper lawsuit and therefore an immediate massive payout for Jimmy and Kim. While Kim insists this scheme was all about getting the money necessary to fund her benevolent, low-paying legal work, Jimmy begins to fear how much he may have corrupted his wife. First, Jimmy and Kim repeatedly plant evidence to make it appear that Howard was addicted to cocaine. Then they frame Howard to appear as if he was regularly and publicly soliciting prostitutes. Howard's lawyer friend and fellow lead on the Sandpiper case, Clifford Maine, confronts him about the cocaine and prostitution, but Howard insists that Jimmy is framing him. Kim becomes convinced that Howard has hired a private investigator to follow her and obtain evidence of her and Jimmy's scheme. But instead, Mike pays her a visit to reveal that it was his men who were following her. He reveals to Kim that Lalo was still alive, and his men were following her in case Lalo tried to make contact. A shaken-up Kim is still resolved to move forward with the plan against Howard. When Cliff notices Kim's work ethic and commitment to defend those that can't afford proper legal counsel, he offers her a meeting with a foundation that financially supports lawyers with similar motivations. This was everything Kim ever wanted, and achieved by her own skill and dedication. But the meeting coincided with the final stage in her plot against Howard. Despite Jimmy's reservations, Kim can't help but to ditch the meeting to complete her plan. During a meeting between Howard, Cliff, and a mediator for Sandpiper named Casimiro, Howard makes a complete fool of himself. Jimmy and Kim had secretly drugged him, making him appear high and unhinged. Jimmy and Kim had also tricked Howard into believing that they had bribed Casimiro, prompting Howard to publicly accuse Casimiro of illegally accepting the bribe. Howard is humiliated in front of his colleagues, and Cliff informs him that they would now be forced to immediately settle the Sandpiper case for much less than they had hoped. As Jimmy and Kim celebrate the successful completion of their plan, a distraught Howard arrives to confront them. Unfortunately, Howard is not the only visitor that would unexpectedly drop in on Jimmy and Kim. Lalo tricks Gus into thinking he was going to attack him that night, prompting Mike to redirect all of their men, including the ones watching Jimmy and Kim, to protect Gus. And so, Lalo enters Jimmy and Kim's apartment in the middle of Howard's confrontation. Despite Jimmy and Kim's pleas, Lalo shoots Howard in the head before telling the couple that they all needed to talk. Lalo orders Jimmy to drive to Gus's home and shoot him in the head, threatening to kill Kim if he doesn't. Jimmy is able to talk Lalo into sending Kim instead, in the hopes that Kim will run away to safety. But Kim plans on saving her husband and follows Lalo's directions to Gus's house in order to kill him. Mike intercepts Kim and, upon learning of Lalo's location, races with his men to Jimmy and Kim's apartment. When Gus learns that Lalo was talked into changing his plan, he deduces that this was all just a distraction. Gus was right, as Mike's team finds Jimmy alone and tied up in the apartment, with Lalo nowhere to be found. Instead, Lalo heads to the secret meth super lab to film evidence of its existence to use against Gus. Despite Mike's orders to stay put, Gus can't help but head to the super lab himself with his small remaining team of men. Lalo kills Gus's men and forces his rival to confess to his many crimes against cartel leader Don Eladio. After making his confession, Gus enacts his own plan for revenge, using a gun he had previously hidden in the lab to finally kill Lalo once and for all. Mike stages Howard's death to look as if he killed himself following his drug addiction being exposed. Howard and Lalo are then buried together underneath the meth super lab, which Gus then tells Mike to resume construction on. Following Howard's death, a guilt-ridden Kim quits her job as a lawyer and breaks up with Jimmy. They had gone too far. They ruined the reputation of a good man, which accidentally led to his death, all because it was fun for them. As Kim tells Jimmy, "I love you, but so what?" That love wasn't worth the damage it caused. With Kim out of his life, Jimmy fully transforms into Saul Goodman as a coping mechanism, wearing gaudy suits, sleeping with prostitutes, and working with known criminals. After signing the divorce papers and giving her portion of the Sandpiper settlement to Saul, Kim runs into the young Jesse Pinkman outside Saul's office. Jesse asks if Saul was a good lawyer as he was in need of one. Kim tells Jesse he was when I knew him. And so, Saul is set on his course of becoming the criminal lawyer for Albuquerque's future drug kingpin, Walter White. Following the events of Breaking Bad, the DEA begins looking into Saul Goodman for his involvement with Walter White. Jimmy hires a man named Ed to help make him disappear, giving him a new life as the manager of a Cinnabon in Omaha named Gene Takovic. Gene reflects on his glory days while living a secluded life without many connections, fearful that his past will come back to haunt him. His worst fears are realized when a taxi driver named Jeff recognizes him as Saul Goodman. Gene considers once again having Ed disappear him, but instead resolves to handle the situation himself. He helps Jeff and his friend Buddy pull off a heist at the local shopping mall. Following the successful heist, Gene threatens to rat on Jeff and Buddy if they ever revealed his true identity. It's now been 6 years since he last saw Kim, and Gene gives her a call in the hopes of reconnecting. Kim has moved to Florida to live a boring but decent life, far removed from all of the drama. When Kim shows no interest in speaking with her ex-husband and tells him to turn himself into the authorities, Gene loses it and slips right back into his con man ways. Kim meanwhile follows her own advice. She returns to Albuquerque and confesses the extent of her crimes to the judge, then does the same to Howard's widow. Although her conscience is now clean, it was unlikely Kim would face any jail time, as there is no physical evidence and the only living witness is her criminal ex-husband. Having cleared her conscience, Kim begins begins volunteering at a free law clinic, bringing her back to her dream of helping those who needed her most. Meanwhile, Jean teams back up with Jeff and Buddy to pull off more cons, stealing the identities of wealthy businessmen around Omaha. But Jean pushes things too far and Jeff winds up arrested. Jeff's kind-hearted and trusting mother Marion begins to realize that her son was involved with a very dangerous man and discovers that the so-called Gene Takovic was actually Saul Goodman and reports him to the police. Saul Goodman is arrested and faces life in prison for his crimes in association with Walter White. While in custody, Saul manages to give an impassioned albeit false speech to Marie Schrader, detailing his innocence in Walter White's crimes, even claiming himself to be a victim. This greatly offends Marie, whose husband Hank was one of the many actual victims. Despite seeing through his act, the prosecution fears that Saul will be able to con a jury and agree to reduce his sentence to a mere 7 years. Saul feels smug and victorious until he discovers that Kim had confessed her involvement in Howard's death to not only the authorities, but also Howard's widow, leaving her open to a civil suit that would permanently ruin her life. As Saul arrives in court to accept his sentence, he instead fully confesses to all of his crimes as Kim watches from the corner. He owns up to the full extent of his involvement in Walter White's crimes. He takes full responsibility for Howard's death, absolving Kim of any wrongdoing. Saul even confesses to his spiteful schemes against his brother, which eventually led to Chuck's suicide. As Saul reclaims his name as Jimmy McGill, he is sentenced to life in prison. The other inmates recognize him as Saul Goodman and pay their respects to the infamous criminal lawyer. As the series comes to a close, Kim visits Jimmy in prison and the two share one final cigarette together. And that's everything that happened over the entire series of Better Call Saul. Now that the series is over, what were your favorite moments and how does it stack up against Breaking Bad? I also want to give a huge thank you to this video's sponsor, Scentbird. Make sure to go to the link in the description and use my promo code RECAPCHILL to get 55% off your first month's order. And that does it for me in this video, but I'll see you in the next one.